Let us invite our first keynote presenter onto the stage.
Yes.
Please welcome the illustrious, the man, the myth, Steve Pereira, everybody.
So, thanks for having me, everyone. I'm really glad to be back here. It's been 10 years since I gave the most terrifying talk of my life at DevOps Days Ghent, the fifth anniversary, on a very, very weird subject. I recommend you check it out if you like weird talks. And this one is less weird, but I think this is really about thinking about what we're doing today from a technical perspective and applying that to our real life, the messy, complicated stuff that really gets in the way of us doing all the fun things. So this is based on a paper that I wrote with John Rouser, who works for Cisco. We met at the DevOps Enterprise Summit last year, and we got talking about networks and how we are really good at networking and we're really bad at running organizations, especially across diverse topologies. So I'm going to tell you what all that means. But the first thing I'm going to introduce is this. Who knows what this is? Anybody? You can shout it out.
The first internet, right?
The first internet, exactly. So this is what everything used to look like. Everything, all of our devices connected to was started in this very humble beginnings and then quickly became this gigantic mess, right? This enormous, complex soup of devices. And this isn't even devices. These are networks. So this is a network of networks. We're not even seeing real complexity here. And somehow it doesn't fall apart, right? It works. And it works at incredible scale. And when we think about organizations, not so much, right? Things get really, really complicated when we're trying to work across diverse topologies of teams, individuals, incentives, all the things that happen inside of an organization. So this can really get crazy if you start thinking about how everything is connected in an organization and start chasing how to understand the complex interconnected information flow and relationships in organizations. And there's a lot of study of this. We have organizational network analysis that's all about social interactions in companies, but I'm kind of interested in a more technical view of organizations as networks because of the fact that the internet works so well. What can we learn from that? So if we look at computer networking and what has allowed it to succeed, it's an evolutionary practice. It has changed a lot over the years, right? Software-defined networking has revolutionized computer networking, but it has worked really well since the days of Token Ring. It's an empirical practice. It's very, grounded in science. It is the most scalable thing that we've ever done in human history. It's resilient. It is diverse. It is made up of all kinds of different actors, right? Some of them entirely antagonistic, right? You can join the internet and just try to attack people, and somehow it doesn't fall over. And it proves itself every single day. It's proving itself right now. Like Chris is on his laptop doing internet things. Fantastic. How many people have heard of the book, Wiring the Winning Organization? So it's fairly new. I highly recommend it. It's really about how do you set up an organization to collaborate and operate effectively. And Gene and Steve, who wrote the book, they kind of break these organizations up into 3 layers. And what I really think deserves attention is this layer 3, where everything gets really, really hard. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about layer 3. We kind of trudge our way through it. We deal with the toil and approvals and complex interactions and silos. And so it's the least understood layer, which is a big problem because it's really where all the work gets done. So we struggle with this scale and variety of different players in organizations and trying to bring them into alignment with each other. We struggle to communicate with each other, and we struggle to send work and build work and collaborate across the topology of organizations. And we really don't, we really struggle to understand how we're doing with all of that. And so if we think about organizations as networks, it's a wrong model, but it's a useful model because there's a lot that we can actually learn from the internet and other digital networks. So we think about, a simple representation of an organization as a collection of value streams, things quickly get pretty complicated, right? From a simple example, we have multiple layers represented. We have multiple different node types and interactions. And so what does this start to look like? It starts to look like a big mess without a practical approach to manage that complexity, right? This is not a network. This is the world's smallest startup. But if you think about, what it takes to run a multi-global or a multinational global organization, we have thousands of these nodes, of teams interacting with each other, sending work all over the place. We need to enable control without undue constraint. We can't over-constrain, add process. We all know how much that sucks. And so we need to manage without reducing our ability to pivot, try new things, remix things. There's a great book called Unbundling the Enterprise that I recommend. It's all about optionality and what having composable applications allows you to do in an organization. And a big problem here is that people are infinitely variable, right? We have multiple perspectives, we have different goals, we have different skill sets, different perspectives. And so if we're trying to enable control of organizations of people, we need to proactively impose constraints that are useful to us, right? Governing constraints and enabling constraints. So when we think about scaling communication and the variety of stakeholders and participants in an organizational network, we need protocols just the same as the internet needs protocols in order for those people to communicate effectively, right? What is a protocol? It's basically just an agreement on a language that we're going to use that's highly constrained that allows us to do that very effectively and consistently. And that allows us to manage cognitive load and complexity across the organization, across this diversity of nodes and participants. So if we think about a very, very simple representation of a network stack, what really is interesting here is where we get this enabling constraint of internet protocol in the middle. An internet protocol is what we found out from this, this book we used as a resource called the spanning layer. Basically, just constrains everything between two different ends of a network and allows them to communicate with each other because they use the same language. They use the same methods of communication, an agreement on how we're going to communicate. So if we think about what this actually looks like, the hourglass model basically says you can have incredible diversity on one side of a network and incredible diversity on another side of the network, and they can communicate effectively without creating a giant mess by having this common communication protocol. And if you think about the internet, everything has an IP, right? IP is basically how all the complexity of the internet is managed. And if you can speak IP, if you speak internet protocol, you can join the internet. And that's all it takes, right? So that one thing enables all this diversity of participation. So if we think about everything in context A, everything in context B, this common constraint allows them to communicate effectively without having to know everything about everything else. And so how does that manifest itself? It's essentially an abstraction of complexity and modularity around that complexity to constrain it, to keep it so that I don't have to care about everything on that side of the fence, and that side doesn't need to care about my side of the fence. And we can communicate over the fence, or however we're doing it, tin cans and string. But if you think about an example of this, DevOps Days is really about dev and ops coming together over infrastructure as code, right? A common language that they could speak that brought those two worlds together so that they weren't speaking different languages and fighting each other on completely different perspectives and goals. So how does this manifest itself today? Gen AI is an amazing spanning layer. It takes all the complexity of everything that it's slurped up into its LLM, and we come with all of the complexity of everything that we could possibly ask it, and we collapse that down into a prompt, right? That takes all that complexity and manages it away, right? Abstracts it away, modularizes it. The two sides of your brain have a spanning layer called the corpus callosum, and it connects the right side and the left side and allows them to communicate with each other because they're very different and they don't really speak the same language. But this middle spanning layer allows them to collaborate with each other. Platforms inside of organizations are another example of abstracting away all kinds of tooling and components so that a developer can come with any number of problems and solve it using a simple abstraction. And then weekly business reviews, quarterly business reviews, the Amazon 6-pager, these are all kind of business artifact versions of spanning layers. Things that take all kinds of options and data and collapse them down to something that we can understand. So when we think about protocols as well, A3, the model for continuous improvement for laying out what an improvement effort will look like, is a very standard form. If you take actually an IP representation and an A3 representation, they look shockingly similar. Just a coincidence. But if you're looking at an organization and trying to improve a value stream charter basically lays out what are we going to do, who's going to do it, all this information in a structured format that anybody can consume. Takes all the variation and variety away and constrains it into something that's very useful. An API spec is another thing that takes all kinds of things that you could do with a specific service and makes it very specific about how to interact with that. And then the Amazon 6-pager formula is a very specific constraint that enables all kinds of complexity behind the scenes. So if we're thinking about multiple layers of organizations, we spend a lot of time thinking about technical objects. In tech, we kind of like them. That's part of why we're here. But I think that this layer 3 is where we need to spend a lot of time because it's really what gets in the way. So this is the book I mentioned that was kind of the inspiration for the pieces of digital networking that we reference in the paper. And a couple of closing thoughts on that. I think protocols are really important as enabling constraints and governing constraints. What do I mean by that? Things that make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. Spanning layers as ways of abstracting and modularizing between different complex domains or complicated domains to simplify them. It can make it very easy to deal with someone who's not part of your world, who doesn't share your context. And then policy and information flow is something that we can really learn from digital networks. Managing complex networks and managing software-defined networking has worked extremely well, and we do a very bad job of this in organizations, but we can learn a lot from it. And what it allows is for self-directed nodes in the network. If you think about teams as nodes in a network, they can operate autonomously if they have the right information in the right form at the right time, right? And management, whoever's running the organization, also can just do a much better job if they have the right information at the right time. And with the right protocols and information flow, you can make that happen. And that's how we get to an internet that doesn't collapse every time we try to use it. Okay, so this is the paper. If you're interested in a lot more context and a lot more behind-the-scenes information, snap that, but you can also just search for Wiring for Flow at IT Revolution. And this is my book on a similar topic. We get into value stream networks and networks of flow across organizations. And so if you're interested in that, if you're interested more at the team level of what this looks like, grab the book. But that's it for me. I hope I didn't go too long. Thanks.